Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Brick, starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Lucas Haas, Nora Zehetner, forgive me if I said that wrong, Nora Fleiss, Matt O'Leary, Emily DeRaven, Nora Segan, Megan Good, and Richard Roundtree, directed by Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson, why am I doing his filmography? Well, I have reviewed one of his movies before, and that was Star Wars The Last Jedi, that not everybody was thrilled about, and I thought it was okay, but not a great movie by any means. And I am doing this because of the new movie he's coming out that I ended up seeing in theaters. I'll talk about it when I get to that movie, Glass Onion. And I'm this is the first 2 weeks I'm gonna be in unfamiliar territory, as I never saw this and I never saw the next one. But I have seen Looper and Knives Out, obviously. So let's see how this goes, because I'm curious about his filmography. In San Clemente, California, Brendan, played by Joseph Gordon Levitt, sees his ex girlfriend Emily, played by Emily DeRaven, has been murdered, and we move on to 2 days earlier, where Brendan gets a note from Emily that she wants to call him on a phone booth. And did phone booths exist back in 2005 when this movie came out? Because I don't think so, which was weird to me. While Emily needs help from Brendan, but I don't know what it is, and a car goes by them, which was interesting but weird. At the same time, Brendan visits the brain, played by Matt O'Leary, asking if he knows where Emily is at, as he doesn't know, and searches around, as this felt like a high school detective story. Only this guy is not a cop, and I like that as a concept. Brendan asks Kara, played by Megan Good, where Emily is at, as she doesn't know and wants to look out for Brendan. And this movie works so well as a high school detective wannabe story, as I care for Brendan, as Joseph Gordon Levitt is a great actor, and I became a fan of his after 50/50, that movie about where he had cancer, and he's great in this early role too, although I have seen him in maybe one or two things beforehand. Brendan goes to a party where Laura, played by Nora Zehetner, forgive me if I said that wrong, notices him at her boyfriend Brad Bramish's house, who hates Brendan to the point they'll have a fight later in the film. And Tugger, played by Noah Fleiss, tells Laura not to talk to him, as director Rian Johnson does a good job shooting San Clemente. And fun fact, he grew up in San Clemente despite he's from Silver Spring, Maryland. Sorry, Ryan. Brendan asks around for where Emily is at, as he does find Dode, played by Noah Segan, and he finds her at lunchtime, and she wants him to stop being angry with the people she hangs around with, as well as stop beating up Dode, which he did when he asked him where Emily was at, and she's free to make their decision, which is fair and understandable. And I do like these characters, as they're very relatable. And I like the cinematography in this movie, as it's great to look at an area where you're from, which that's around where I live, I'll say. In the movies, as Richard Linklater did the same thing with The Scanner Darkly, but the only difference is that one was animated, and this movie isn't. Brendan finds Emily's dead body near a tunnel and runs in there because he heard someone running in there, which felt random, sure, but I like how fucking random this movie is right off the bat. Brendan gets to the school library where he sees the brain, and he tells him Emily is gone, and he walks out with a memory of where they broke up, and he picks up her body and puts it in the tunnel, as the shots worked amazingly in this film. Brendan hears about the kingpin of town named the Pin, who's played by Lucas Haas, and visits Kara to get information about the pin, while Brad rants about not being in the game, while Brendan was just listening, and asks Brendan intensely who invited him to the parking lot, as they have a fight where Brendan kicks him in the leg twice and defeats him in like a minute or two, which was an intense but a good fight, by the way. Kudos. Laura wants to help Brendan, as he can't trust her, and calls the brain, and afterhand, he gets beat up by Tugger and goes straight to Assistant Vice Principal Gary Truman, played by Shaft himself, Richard Roundtree. And for what little he does in this movie, I'm thinking, what the fuck is Shaft doing in this movie? But either way, he turned in good work here as he works as a vice principal. I do like looking at the outside when we are outside, as it makes me think I've been in this neighborhood before, which I have. While Brendan thinks about asking Tugger for the pin and again beats his ass up and almost runs his ass over until he decides, fuck it, I'll lift you, but in the trunk, which was engaging but funny. When Brendan barely opens the trunk to see where he's at, and as Tugger leads him to the pin, he covers his eyes even when he takes him to the pin, and this guy is menacing looking, and this actor does a good job at looking menacing. While he lives with his mother, which is an interesting choice, as this movie makes interesting choices. Brendan gets dropped off at school by Laura, and she talks with him at school about Emily and how she sees him as she still wants to help Brendan with what he needs. As he visits Kara, who flirts with him, as she misses having someone to talk to, and he asks her about Dode, as he knows something is up with Dode, and the next day, Brendan gets a note and gets chased by one of the minions of the pin named Curtis. And I was like, God damn, this guy can run super fast. As he takes off his shoes and purposely trips and kills kills Curtis on something metal. And I thought, Jesus Christ. As the pin said yes to him joining in the mob, which was a good choice too. Brendan gets a call from Dode as he knows what he has done, and Brendan calls the brain and meets with the pin, and he talks about how he wants to be in the Middle Earth thanks to J.R.R. Tolkien and the Hobbit books, which was funny to bring up because that's a series I've already done. Ha! The brain calls Brendan to be at the school, and they talk about a drug called Brick, and I guess that's the reason for the movie's title. And he calls Truman because Emily's death goes wide as he's not safe in the area. And he goes to the Pin's house to grab some cash while sneaking around, which has got to be fucking dangerous, and does a trick with the mirror, which is brilliant. Even the mummy with Brendan Fraser made her look brilliant. While Tugger picks up Brendan, and I like how Tugger is a tough motherfucker, as he puts down Brendan and talks with him about what the pin knows and what Tugger doesn't know himself, until the pin comes in talking about Emily's death as the person has information about who did it. And Laura gives Brendan a ride and he asks her to do something for him as he sees Dode, and he says what he believed in, which it was Brendan killed her, but the truth is he didn't. And Dode wants to bury him, and these scenes are working as they're engaging me. Brendan catches up with Dode, and he gets to the pin, and Tugger with Dode, and Brendan says it's Dode, and they can't trust him. And Tugger goes and beats up on Dode and shoots him to death, while the pin walks away, and Brendan coughs for all the blood, and he sees, well, which shocked the hell out of me. They get back to Tugger's house to lay down low, and Brendan lays in bed while Tugger is smoking in the bathroom and tells him Laura wants him to sleep, and he wakes up to call the brain, and he goes to Kara, and as he confronts her about her play beginning, and Brendan is angry with her and shows off her ace, and the gang takes matters into their own hands as Laura sleeps with Brendan. And so far as we get into the climax is very straightforward. Brendan calls the brain and tells him he's going to blame the pin for Emily's murder by putting drugs in Tugger's trunk, who's to the pin's house, and enters the room with Tugger as he talks with the pin about how he's nobody's butler and he's been his muscle man this entire damn time. And we hear things like someone beating up on the pin's minions and loses the brick, and Tugger beats up on the pin, and the pin asks Brendan for help as he walks out of the room and puts a gun on the ground and throws it to the ground for someone to get it, And Brendan gets out of there and sees Emily's dead body and calls the brain and goes to school and waits on the football field. And Laura hugs him and tells him they're all dead, including Tugger, as she's claimed about it. Or calm, excuse me. Which seems kind of fucked up in so many ways. And he tells her Laura, the one who killed Emily, was the one who killed Emily, as he tells her how he figured it out as Truman finds a bag, excuse me, full of cocaine that I believe was the brick in one of the lockers that belonged to Laura, and she walks away with, and we learn the brain Brad hired Chuck to knife Brendan to death. And this climax is tremendous at the end of the day. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.1 out of 10. I do like the characters, as Brendan was relatable, and I am a huge Joseph Gordon-Levitt fan. And the other characters were really good, as the Pin does a good job at being menacing. And I like the cinematography, as director Ryan Johnson grew up in San Clemente, despite being from Maryland. And I like looking at places where I've been in before in the movies. It makes interesting choices that are really fucking random, but I went with it, as this is a great first start for Ryan Johnson in his career, as this is a great story about a high school wannabe detective solving the mystery of who killed his ex-girlfriend. The movie was well made, and it tells a good story and does a good job at telling it, and I like the way Ryan Johnson tells it, so this is a solid recommendation. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with the Brothers Bloom, and until then, ciao.